Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's been a while, and it's such a joy to be back on the podcast. I have some big film updates for you all, but I might leave those till the very end of this conversation because today I'm joined by a woman who's very dear to my heart. I'm joined by Natalie Gyte. Natalie is a new mama to Rose and a partner to Luke. What a man. What an incredible man. I'm just going to say that now. Natalie is a national champion in boxing, an ex-basketball player for England, and a master trainer at Trip Space in London. She is currently navigating a downshift into slow living as she journeys into motherhood. And she describes this beautiful phase of life of loving and raising her child as her highest calling. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I've been wanting to invite you onto the podcast, not only because your birth story is such a beautiful example of what is possible for families beyond the medical model of birth, but actually, most importantly, because there was a journey to that birth experience that really deserves to be acknowledged. You know, whenever we hear of a positive birth story, of an ecstatic birth story, of an orgasmic birth story, in this case of a free birth story. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, this means that Natalie and her partner Luke decided to give birth to Rose at home without any medical assistance. And the choice to have a free birth story, at least these days, is very rarely the starting point, right? There is always a story, there's always a journey that leads to that decision. And I would really love all our listeners to get a sense of the internal journey that you went through, Natalie, which really led you to a place of so completely trusting your capacity to give birth to Rose from your own innate body wisdom without any medical assistance. So before we go there, I'm actually very curious to hear if you can remember where you were at the very beginning of your pregnancy. Like if you take yourself back to the very early stages of pregnancy, do you remember what your thoughts and beliefs and desires around birth were?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying I'm 7 months postpartum, and I'm very embedded in baby raising and all of its magic. And at the same time, I don't always find my words anymore. So if I hesitate or repeat my words, please bear with me. Um, so really, at the beginning of my pregnancy, I mean, we're looking at a lifetime of conditioning around birth and around pregnancy. I gave birth at 37 years old. So that's nearly 4 decades of consuming a narrative that pregnancy is debilitating and that these awful changes happen to your body and that birth itself is really the worst pain that a human being can go through. And this media portrayal of a woman in hospital with its bleached surfaces and its strange doctors who you've never met before and being on your back with many monitors and needles. And I will freely tell you that I was petrified. I was very, very frightened, and particularly about medical intervention. The thought of being in a hospital, a place where people go when they're unwell, really scared me quite deeply. And I had had a distrust of Western medicine from my own experiences with it before. So yeah, I mean, I was very scared. And having said all of that, I did have somehow some inkling of a belief that birth could be a really beautiful and enriching experience. But I wasn't ready. I couldn't access that. So yeah, I had this idea that there was a different paradigm that was sort of a neighbor to my paradigm, but that I wasn't fully aware of. I can't say that I even had the vocabulary to express what I wanted. Um, because I had not been exposed to a different paradigm, and because I was quite shut down by fear and worry of everything that I'd been exposed through mainstream media. So I had this idea that it could be sacred and profound and transcendent and magical, and that it could bring Luke and I much even closer than we already were. But I wasn't sure how to do that, really.
I love what you're saying, that you didn't have the words for it, but that you
Mm.
felt the potential of
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Um,
Inkling of potential.
yeah. And yet, I'm aware that you took some steps towards creating that, right? And what steps did you take to come
Right.
closer to those desires, or that inkling, or that sense of
Yeah.
what is possible for women in birth?
Right. So the very first thing that I did was engage a doula, and that was you. Oh my gosh. How wonderful, how lucky I was to meet you. And the moment that I saw your profile, it was love at first sight. I was like, that's the one. I didn't speak to anyone else. It was immediate. It was this knowing straight away, which was so beautiful. And
Mm.
Luke, I chose Luke as a partner so specifically such a long time ago when we first met, for his absolute faith and his understanding of who I am as a person, and he understood completely my need. He didn't understand the ins and outs of what a doula does and what we might experience over the course of the pregnancy, but he said, okay, if you need it, you have it. And so I engaged with you, and we undertook with you really, I think, a 7-month program of education. And
Yeah.
every month we received different educational modules from you, and they included writings, podcasts, meditations, diagrams, all sorts of things to help us understand. And each month was a different topic. Um, and they taught, those modules taught us a lot about physiological birth, which we didn't know, we had no idea, and a lot about the spiritual aspects of birth, and yeah, they prompted us to have very beautiful, very open conversations with each other, which caused us to grow a lot closer, and grow closer to the pregnancy itself, which was just magical to have these wonderful conversations. Could we have had those conversations alone? Probably. But again, as I say, I didn't quite have the vocabulary there. And so to be prompted with these beautiful questions and meditations and so on, they helped us expand our minds and helped us find the language to be able to engage with each other, about what we wanted, how it might look, how it might feel, most importantly, how it might feel. Yeah, and it created a bubble around us, the three of us, the four of us, myself, Luke, Rose in utero, and yourself, Samara. And you would come to see us once a month, and we would discuss what Luke and I had been speaking about, and we would gain your perspective, and we would ask you questions, and they were really beautiful meetings. And whenever you came into our house, it felt like this beautiful, ethereal mist settled over our house, and we could speak so openly about the birth and really almost revel in the growing birth. It was so magical. Um,
Mm.
it was wonderful, and I
I
can't thank
loved I loved those sessions. I absolutely adored working with you.
thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah,
it's such a joy.
it was beautiful. It was
Yeah.
really great. And I did a lot of reading. I prefer audiobooks, especially I had slightly kind of twitchy legs during my pregnancy, and sometimes found it hard to sleep. So I would listen to Ina May Gaskin's works. So I probably listened, as you said at the beginning, so many people listen to birth stories. I probably listened to over 100 birth stories. And by that time, I had understood the biological workings of birth. So I really honed in on the spiritual aspect of people's experience of birth and the different spiritual ways that people experienced it, and they were beautiful, really beautiful. And so it did a lot of paradigm shifting work with your guidance and with Luke's presence and witness to hold space for me to grow my consciousness around what was possible and what I wanted. And my work was really to realize that I had already curated a life for myself that I loved, and that I could similarly construct my own paradigm for pregnancy and birth and then motherhood. And so with all of that said, we developed a really deep belief in the innate wisdom of women's bodies, of my body, and we decided that we wanted to free birth, which meant no midwife, no doctor, just myself, Luke, and you present in our home. And that was really that was the journey. It was education, it was deep work, it was writing, it was just talk, it was so beautiful, just openness and honest conversations. It was wonderful.
So the funny thing is that we've lived that together, you know, as you said, over a period of 7 months. And I'm wondering if we could maybe draw some significant, or if you could share some significant moments from your journey towards your birth experience. You know, this could be like a revelation that really shifted your perspective on what was possible. It could also be a challenge that came up and how you approached it, and moved through that. I think that would be great to just maybe give like a specific sense of what that journey looks like. Yeah.
Right. There are a few moments that I can pinpoint. So fear, I mean, I've said it a few times already, but fear was the biggest pressure point for me. And so there was a time when you introduced to us a module around fear. And Luke had no fears. He was so confident. His belief was so strong. And for me, I went, hold on a minute. I have a lot of fear, and I was almost resentful of him that he had no fear. And I had to dig very deep. And I got up at about 2 a.m. and I wrote a lot, and I wrote all of my fears down. And it was a long list. It was a really long list. I think I listed it to you one time. And then I had to really work through and envisaged how I could move past those fears. So fear was my biggest pressure point. And then there were significant moments that we experienced when we engaged with the medical system. So we engaged with the medical system for scans. And we found the experience to be somewhat disorganized, and also, I would say, based in fear. Or based in looking for a problem as opposed to expecting that everything would be great. So I think this happened to us 3 times, and we only had 4 scans, I think. So we went to the hospital, and the technician would start the scan and then would pull a face or make a noise and say, "Oh, I've seen this and I've seen this, and I'm going to have to speak to a superior who's going to have to come and take a look." And they would leave the room, and each time Luke would say, "There is nothing wrong with this baby. There is nothing wrong with you. No one is stronger than you. No one is more healthy than you. There is nothing wrong with this baby, I promise you." And then the superior would come, and they would take a look, and they would do the calculations, and no, it's fine. Everything is fine. And we knew it. We absolutely knew it. But you know, for myself, for those 5 minutes, my heart rate would go up, and I would get a little bit nervous, and then I would have to do the work to release those fears again.
But right,
So
naturally, you know, I'm thinking of all the women who don't have a partner like Luke alongside them. It's so natural for your heart rate to go up and start, you know, worrying and focusing on what could go wrong, you know. It's a very natural thing. So yeah, this is, you know, the importance of having someone along your side who continuously brings you back to the knowing that all is well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That his presence, his his holding space and very much being the masculine there to hold space for me it was just utter, like divine, just wonderful for me.
So divine.
So. And that, as I said, I already had a distrust of the medical system, but each time we engaged with it, that distrust just became more sharp for both of us. And of course, the medical system is so important in so many ways. 100%. I don't wish to speak negatively en masse, but we came to believe so strongly that birth is not an illness. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a beautiful natural process that needs no intervention. And so after engaging with the medical system somewhat, we were even more clear than ever that we wanted to free birth. And then I think that as our deepening of birth, the deepening of our understanding of birth progressed, I felt more and more connected with the pregnancy and with my baby and with my body. And I slowed down massively for the first time in my adult life, maybe even since, age 10 or 11 or so, just allowed myself to rest for the first time and really embody the feminine in a way that I had not been before. I had been driven before, pushing very much in my intellect, trying to get things done. And for the first time, I just relinquished very much and just allowed it to happen. And that was wonderful. I had been missing that in my life. So that real shift.
I love that you share that piece because I say this very often, but I always see pregnancy, birth, and the postnatal period as a continuum, not so much as separate chapters as we kind of usually see them, right? But often what I find is that the tone that we cultivate during pregnancy very much informs our birth experience. And then the tone of our birth experience very much influences the postnatal period, right? And it's very interesting that you're bringing this piece in of learning to slow down during your pregnancy and letting things be, right? Which was such a big invitation for you during the birth, and it took you deeper and deeper into that, and we're going to go into that in a second. I love your birth story for so many reasons. And then of course that kind of rippled into how you approached motherhood as well. Would you be open to sharing with us a little bit about your birth experience?
Yes, I would. Oh wow, I may cry. Let's see. So we started at 4 a.m. Just some very mild pains and noticing that something was happening, but we wondered if perhaps it was Braxton Hicks contractions or something like that. So I drove Luke to the tube at 6 a.m. so that he could go up to the gym. I was like, go up to the gym, let's see what happens. I came back, I sat, I relaxed. We do not have a cat, but there was a little cat that used to visit us, and she came to visit me. She visited me throughout my whole pregnancy, and she sat with me and purred. And then I drove back to the tube to pick Luke up at 8:30. And while I was in the car, I was stationary in traffic, and I texted him. I said, I just had a contraction. It's happening. It's definitely happening. And so we got home, and Luke started putting down many towels and many blankets and things. And by 10 a.m., the contractions, and I know a lot of people call them surges, and I really understand that language is so important. And I'll tell you why I still call them contractions in a moment. So the contractions were starting quite strong, and we gave you a call, and I do remember you listening to how I was, and you were, yes, this is definitely happening. And the reason that I call them contractions, because for me, it was not a surge. It was a genuine deep, deep pain. And so many people's stories are different. So, many women do not experience this in the same way. But we had candles set up, we had our music on, and then you arrived at 2 p.m. and I was in the most intense, primal, deep pain that I could have ever imagined. And it felt like this baby was trying to come so fast. Like she was
She
trying
was
to,
so ready. Yeah.
she
She would
was
have flown out of you if she could.
She would. She would. She wanted to come like lightning, and it felt like lightning. And so my instinct was to put my head down to the floor and to put my bum up in the air. And I think you told me afterwards that this slightly disengages the pelvis and therefore is slowing down the birth. You didn't tell me at the time, and we didn't speak at the time. There was just space holding. There was no interaction. I was deep. And yet at the same time, I was hyper aware of everything.
Mhm,
I was
mhm.
hyper aware of what was happening to me in my body. And I did not feel like my body was opening up quickly enough to facilitate how quickly she wanted to come.
Mm.
And so I was trying to slow it down a little bit while also trusting the process. And there were a few times that we said, okay, Luke said, maybe try to sit upwards. And I had a little birthing stool. Let's try to sit on the birthing stool. No, absolutely not. I tried and I immediately thought I was going to break in half. I had to get off immediately. And so I felt like I was in anguish, like real, like I was sobbing with each contraction, but there were no tears. It was this verbal sobbing. And yet, when I've spoken to you and Luke afterwards, you both have told me that I seemed perfectly in control, perfectly, obviously not happy, but not out of my mind. But in my mind, I was going up the walls. But it does give me some nice feeling that I still like. I spoke to Luke in the way I always would speak to him. There was no, this media idea of like the woman screams and swears at the husband. No, I was I please don't touch me. I really need to be like I need to be alone and I need to not be touched. And I thought we were gonna gaze into each other's eyes and hold hands and he would touch me. It wasn't the case for me. In this instance, I was enduring, just enduring. And I remember at some point I said to the two of you, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot do this. Why, when is this happening? What is happening to me? But I do remember that there was one time that you told me during our education that there is always a point when a woman says, I can't do this anymore. And that in the Mexican tradition, that is the point where the woman's soul leaves her body and goes out and finds the soul of her baby and brings the soul of the baby back down into the body. And that stuck in my mind, like that this is the point of, this is a good point. We're in a good point. And I do remember you saying at the time, when you feel it's at your worst is when we're really getting somewhere, or something to that effect.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was going up the walls, and I was hot, then I was cold, freezing, chattering cold, and then sweating hot. And you helped me very, very much with hot compresses. I think the water was close to boiling, and I was like, put it on me. It feels 1% better. And I know because you were struggling to touch the flannel. And I was like, yes, give it to me.
Proper old school pain relief, by the way.
Yeah.
Hot
Yes.
compresses on the back, on the belly, on the
Yes.
perineum,
It
everywhere.
made all the difference, Samara. Thank you so much. It made a huge difference. It still was not bearable, but it was 1% more bearable. And
Mhm.
so if we had started with the proper contractions at about 10 a.m., it probably, I would say, got up to about 5 p.m. And I could feel inside, I could feel the top of her head. So I know I had gone through transition and that I knew I needed to push. So I was always already having that feeling. And to be able to touch her head told me I'm making it. It's happening. I am saying to myself, I can't do this, but I am doing it. I'm already doing it, and she's on her way. And now I can track how close she's getting, and she was getting closer and closer. And it was just unbelievable to feel that she was coming. And so I don't know. I think I was maybe only pushing, yeah, for about an hour or an hour and a half, and then her head came, and Luke was the first person to look at her, and her eyes were wide open, and she looked at him straight in the eyes. And then he witnessed her turn herself. And that part stays with me, the unbelievable force of nature that a baby knows to turn itself sideways, and that my baby did that. I didn't even do it. I didn't even know it was happening. And she was doing it on her own. It still blows my mind. And that set me up in postpartum to trust her and to say, you knew what to do, my baby. You still know what to do. And so Luke was there with her. And then I had one more big push, and she came out onto the floor. We forgot to catch her in all of the craziness. We forgot to catch her, and I scooped her up in my arms and I held her, and I was saying, we've got you, everything's okay. Mommy's got you. And I sat with her, and a few seconds later, having thrown off, so as I said, I was hot and then I was cold. So I had been cold, I'd had a big blanket around me, and then I threw it off because I was so hot to push the final times, and I was so hyper alert that you and Luke were looking at the baby and looking at me, and is everything okay? I could smell burning, and I had thrown this blanket off, and it had landed on a candle, and it was burning. And I was still in a very alert mode, and I think perhaps I didn't have that kind of. It had felt like such a brutal primal experience to me. I don't think that I experienced that deep oxytocin release, because I think that perhaps a stressor in my body was maybe counteracting it slightly. And so after she was born, I mean, my legs were contracting involuntarily. I was quite tight. I was trying to relax. And it was very hard for me to birth the placenta. It took a long time, longer than what medical professionals would deem is appropriate.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to pause you here because there's a few things that you've shared. So there's something very potent about Natalie's birth story, which we're going to get to very, very soon. If you may have noticed that she used the word endure. I was enduring it, right? This is going to become very, very clear as we move along. But this is just what we're going to get to the bottom to is something that I deeply believe in, which is basically we give birth the way we live, and our life patterns show up in our birth. Our beliefs show up in our birth, and we can do the work. We can go through the journey, but some of these beliefs are just really, really deep. We were born into them. We've practiced them for a very long time, and they influence everything we do.
Right.
And so Natalie is now going to go into what I find really the most profound aspects of her birth experience that I believe really, really grew you actually into the woman that you are now. So go ahead.
Beautiful. Thank you, Samara. As I said, I was struggling to birth a placenta. I had totally clenched up and was not able to relax. And I kept saying to myself, I've just birthed a baby with a skull. I should be able to birth what is essentially like a jelly sack. Physiologically, there was nothing holding me back. So I've just seen Rose at the back door. So this must be something psychological. It must be. And so I took my time, and Luke really believed in me, and we did discuss whether I should go to the hospital or not, because we know that in hospitals they want you to birth the placenta within either half an hour or an hour, I'm not sure. And so we discussed it, and I said, I will not go. I will not go. I know this is a psychological thing for me. This is not a physiological thing. And so I just need time. And there's something that you said to me, Samara. You said to me, are you the person that has, I think you said, I know from speaking to you that you are the person who has to hold it together, has to hold on to things, it was really holding together of something. And it really resonated with me. And after Rose was born, I had not cried until you said those words to me. And when you did, I went, oh, I'm holding this together. I'm clenching and holding together. After you said that to me, I managed to go to sleep for an hour. And when I woke up, I pushed one almighty push, and the placenta came. But as I said, it took a long time. And after Rose's birth, I almost felt a little bit disappointed and like sad that it had gone that way, that that I had endured, as you really rightly pointed out, and I wasn't even really that aware that I used that word. And when we had a debrief, and you asked me, what are your beliefs around what is necessary to achieve something wonderful and beautiful? And without even thinking, I said, well, you have to work extremely hard, you have to suffer, and you have to push and endure. And you're like, of course. So that's what came up in the birth. And despite all of our work and all my beliefs, there was around birth itself, there's still an underlying life belief that you have to work hard and you have to suffer in order to succeed in life. And that's a familial pattern for me within my family. And kind of suffering to get what you really, really want to achieve.
Which brings me to my next question, which is one that I've asked you before. But I'd love for you to share with us what lifelong lessons did you receive from that birth experience? Because I feel like there's plenty there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are the very there are lessons that are sort of more obvious, let's say, around having belief in myself and in my body. Definitely. Total belief in what I can do. Belief in the magic and the sacredness and profundity of the nature of birth. Absolutely. Belief that we can rewrite our paradigm. So my paradigm around like what birth is and how fearful and the kind of medical system, I rewrote that paradigm for myself. Absolutely. And then this point around such hard work and such struggle, that is a learning that I'm still grappling with a little bit, because long held beliefs do take a long time to change sometimes, and they're not quite, the new ways of thinking aren't quite embodied yet. So I'm really sort of trying to embrace the more feminine, slow life, being receptive to life, and trying to rewire myself really away from patterns of I must work hard, I have to suffer in order to achieve anything. But that's taking a little bit longer, I have to admit. That's not an overnight change, but it is an overnight realization.
Absolutely. So I had the honor of walking alongside this beautiful mama for just over a year, which is the longest I've actually ever worked with a couple. So we've really gotten to know each other very intimately, and I would really love to share probably one of the most moving experiences I've ever had, which was witnessing Natalie hold space for baby Rose. This one time I was there when baby Rose was very, very upset. So Natalie knew that this upset didn't have anything to do with, with feeding, with teething, with a nappy.
Right.
So Natalie was holding Rose as Rose was weeping, whilst letting her know that Rose had every right to fully express whatever she was feeling, grief, sadness. We can't be entirely sure,
Right.
but that her big emotions were absolutely welcome, and that you were going to be there with her, for her, loving her until it moved through her body, right? So, of course, this experience brought me to tears, not only because I mean, you and I very much believe that if that had, if that was a common experience that we received early on, the world would be a different place. But also
Right.
just how beautiful to take the time to be open enough to be able to witness your own child's sadness lovingly without wanting to distract them, or make them feel better, which, is kind of, an understandable impulse, but yet having enough respect for their emotions and their, their internal experience, that you would let them,
Right.
you would compassionately hold space for them to release that.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that the postnatal journey is multi-layered for everyone. I know that so much happens within that space, but I'm wondering if you would share with us, some significant learnings
Right.
that you've received through that time.
Yeah. Well, the idea that you have beautifully articulated is a new one to me. So I had understood that babies would only cry for three reasons: they needed a diaper change, or they were hungry, or they had some discomfort like gas or something. And yet I was experiencing that there were times when Rose would cry when all of those things had been dealt with. And it was confusing to me why she would continue to cry. And I came across aware parenting, which is it's a form of attachment parenting. And I didn't know what attachment parenting was. I only did research around birth, and I thought, oh, and then I'll take it from there, and I'll be a natural, and then realize, oh, this is a lot. So I was already co-sleeping with Rose. She was already attached to me all the time. She never went in a pram. I always wore her on me. I breastfed on demand. I read her cues as to when she needed to feed or when she might have discomfort. I was doing all of that naturally. And yet there were these times when she would cry. And so aware parenting is, I hope I say this right, is an attachment-based, trauma-informed approach to parenting. And so as it pertains to babies, probably the main element of that is that babies have feelings. They may even have feelings around their own birth or around, and we had to take Rose into hospital for jaundice on day 5 of her life. And that was a deeply upsetting experience. She may have feelings, she almost certainly has feelings about that. And so every time Rose would cry, but it was unexplained to me, I would pacify her with breastfeeding. Even if I knew she wasn't hungry, she had eaten and eaten and eaten, but then she cried, oh, let me give her some more. And we had many suggestions around, well, maybe try a pacifier, maybe try some sort of little blanket that she can hold on to. Many different suggestions from, beautiful, well-meaning people. But what I came to understand through aware parenting is that if your child has feelings, but you pacify them in some way, they will learn to disassociate from their feelings and not experience their feelings in their body. Because, and you know, Gabor Mate's work really well. And if anyone doesn't know of Gabor Mate, please go and find him. He's wonderful. I've seen him on a podcast say that if a child experiences feelings, but as we all do, but is told in some way that those feelings should not be experienced, so you pacify them, or when they're older, you tell them off because they have a tantrum or something like this, then the child must choose between their authentic self and their authentic feelings, or doing what the parent tells them to do, which is, oh no, don't feel that, because have some more breast milk, or don't do that, it's okay. Distract with a toy, or later down the line, perhaps, tell them off or use harsh words towards them. And so when a child must choose between their authentic self or what they must do to please their parents, they very much detach from their own body. And when I learned this, Rose was already 3 months old, and I felt a very deep sense of sadness that I had not known this sooner, and that I was perhaps causing her to disassociate from her feelings. And so we started to listen to her cries. I mean, we would make sure that everything else, that she was fed, that the nappy was clean, all the things, all the variables that we knew about, we would make sure that they were all fine. And it's usually as she's getting tired. So the more tired, and you know this as a human being, the more tired you are, then when something reminds you of something and then you feel feelings, then you just can't contain them. When you're more tired, you then are often more distressed. And it's the same for babies. And so before nap times or bedtimes at night, she's more likely to have these unexplained cries. And so we started to just hold her and tell her, my darling, I'm here. All your feelings are welcome. All your feelings are valid. Mummy's here. I'm holding you. I love you. You express yourself so beautifully. And allow her to cry. And there's times when she would cry for an hour and a half. And the time with you, I think, was probably about an hour. And you, myself, and Rose sat in my bedroom and just held space for her and witnessed her crying. And it was so hard for me to do that, because I wondered am I just withholding breastfeeding her, or withholding distracting her? I could make all this go away in an instant by making it okay. And I had to, but logically it makes sense to me. She needs to release, and the body's natural release mechanism is through crying or through laughter. And so we've been practicing this ever since, and we're finding it certainly challenging, but because my paradigm is, let me help my baby, let me make it okay. But we are seeing Rose change. I mean, sometimes overnight through this work. And I believe in it. I really believe in it. And I would love to hear how you found it to be a third person in the room experiencing it.
I mean, it was so moving. It was so moving. As I said, I don't know if I've said this, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. And yeah, I think it's one of those experiences that's beyond words. I just think it requires so much patience and tenderness and going beyond the self to really listen. Really listen to your baby's needs, which in that moment is to cry and release. And we don't need to know necessarily the why, because we may not, but the important thing is that it's coming up,
Right.
and that it needs to move through, right? And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful gift that I mean, you're actually the one who introduced me to aware parenting. That's not it's not a field, it's not an approach that I was aware of until then. And I'm so thankful that I didn't just get to kind of go into the theory of it, but that I got to experience
Right.
as well,
Yeah.
and see, and it felt so right. So I'm aware that maybe some people, are listening and they're like, "Oh my goodness, what? You left her cry for 1 hour." But I can
Right.
tell you that if you're in that space and you're witnessing it and you're seeing this baby being held by Natalie, who's continuously telling her that, she's welcome to express, that Natalie is right there, and you can tell that the baby knows. The
Right.
baby knows that she's being given more and more permission, right?
Yeah.
And that there's this kind of dialogue, this nonverbal dialogue, this emotional, very somatic dialogue that happens between mother and child, where the more you would say that, the more she would release. And it's a different kind of cry, right? I think that's probably the
Yes.
art of mothering, is that you get to distinguish the different kinds of cry. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say to everyone out there that when you're actually in that space witnessing that, it's you I mean, I felt like I was literally witnessing a moment of deep grief, of upset, of heartache, and you were holding it in the way that we would all love to be held in those moments, right?
Right. Right.
Which is lovingly just having someone hold us,
Yeah.
not having us feel like it's wrong to cry, or we're crying for too long, or
Right.
that we're making the other person feel uncomfortable, all things that actually we're all familiar with, right? Because it's through these moments, it's through our mothers that we learn, that we
Right.
learn what's accepted and what is not when it comes to our emotional release, and all these
Yeah.
things, I imagine, are so internalized, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I invite all our audience to, like, consider, right, when you have a big moment of grief in your home, I would say that, especially in England, I imagine that one of the first things that cross your mind is like, "Oh, I don't want to be a burden to the people around me,"
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
I think we learn this way earlier
Mm.
than we think, way earlier. Whereas Rose is receiving through you that whenever she feels, deeply emotional, not only can she express it, but that will be welcome, and she can take as long as she needs, right?
Right. Right.
And that's now been imprinted. Like, she knows that deeply on a cellular level, right?
Right.
Um, So yeah, I just think it's a really beautiful practice that I wanted to bring up, because I'm aware that actually not many people are familiar with it.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, check out Aware Parenting.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and it invites deep introspection for yourself as a parent, because what comes up for you yourself listening to your child can be inner child work for yourself.
Mhm.
It can really make you reflect on your own norms and your own upbringing and your own beliefs and why you feel that way and what patterns have been instilled in yourself. And so
Mhm.
over the last 7 months, I've done a ton of internal work. I thought that the difficulty of mothering would be sleepless nights and leaking breasts and no time to myself. No, these things are not a blip on the radar. I've done much harder things in a kind of organizational sense. But the deep inner work, the kind of psychological and spiritual work, that has been where the work is. That's where my work continues now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so beautiful that you're embracing that aspect of motherhood. I think that that's what motherhood is. I think it's a deep time of transformation, and I think we resist it so much.
Mm.
That the first invitation to slow down that comes in pregnancy, I see women really resisting that and really struggling
Right.
with that, and I just feel like that's just the beginning of a long journey that, I mean, is so rewarding. What could be more profound,
Yeah.
right? Than like literally becoming the mother archetype that's so deeply receptive to herself and what's going on internally and how that's affecting her child, and vice versa. I think it's something that you're embracing so beautifully. So thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your stories, your experience, your journey. And what an honor as well. I'm very aware that you're sharing very, very intimate experiences, and what an honor for all our listeners to be welcomed into that, and to have a sense now of what it looks like, what it may look like, to walk that path and experience an unassisted birth, and really, really like come into closer relationship with your innate body wisdom, with your baby's innate body wisdom as well.
Precisely.
So how beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Natalie.
Thank you. What a beautiful way to spend an hour. And I guess I would say to anyone that if you are interested in this, in home birth, in free birth, or aware parenting, the most important thing is to find the right resources and find the right people. Had I not found you, my experience would not have been the same. Had I not found aware parenting, and there's a specific woman that I'm working with called Marion Rose, PhD. You can go and find her. Like, she's incredible, and she's changing the way that I'm seeing life even. So if you can call in the right people to you, that is just paramount, because sometimes you might even think, oh, I think I've got this. I think I know how it goes. But to have the right people around you makes that experience life-changing and transformative, which it has been for me. So I want to thank you for everything ever since I met you over the last year. It's been a real honor to be around you.
My joy, and my pleasure. Yeah, you are more than welcome to stay for the film updates. But I just wanted to share with everyone that, as many of you know, Birth in Your Story is a project that is very, very close to my heart. I am devoted beyond words to telling this story. And over the last year, since the crowdfunding campaign, I've been on my own journey, actually, of research and development, and really becoming clear around the story that I wish to tell, and most importantly, how I wish to tell it through the medium of film. My background is not in film, although I am a creative. There has been a lot of learning over the last year. And very recently, I have been offered a beautiful opportunity, which so the options were to either complete what I had begun with the small budget that I had left, the small bit of funding that I had left from the crowdfunding campaign, or to consider this whole year as a whole process of learning and refining, and to then develop that into a bigger production that will reach more people. So of course, I'm someone who dreams big, and of course I went for that option, which means that the project will probably take another 2 years or more to complete. And actually, coming back to what you were sharing, Natalie, about slow living, I think that it's taken me time to accept that sometimes the best things in life cannot be rushed. And why would you want to rush them, right? Like, I really want to enjoy the making of this film. It's too precious to me to rush. And I trust that it has its own innate timing and its own innate wisdom that I personally don't have full control over. So, I have taken that path. I'm letting all of you know, but I very much intend to keep engaged with you all. And I will mostly be offering, over the last year, I have gathered some of the most incredible interviews with people from around the world, birth keepers from around the world. So they will all be shared via the podcast. That is a platform that you can return to and be enriched by and informed through. And best place to keep in touch is through social media and the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being with us. And love you all. We'll be in touch. Bye.